That night, every step he took, he expected a bullet to find him. But trust was a luxury no operative could afford. Agent Cipher, the codename was all that remained of his former identity, moved through the rain-soaked streets of Prague like a ghost, his collar turned up, his face deliberately forgettable. The dead drop was scheduled for 23:47 at the fountain near the Old Town Square. Simple, routine, exactly the kind of operation that had gotten him through the last 15 years without a bullet in his spine. But something felt wrong. The sensation crawled up his neck like cold fingers, the kind of premonition that separates the living operatives from the ones stuffed in unmarked graves. He'd learned to trust his instincts in this business. Instincts had saved him more times than luck ever could. Still, he pushed forward. Mission parameters were clear. Extract the intelligence, deposit the package, disappear into the night like you were never there. His earpiece crackled. Static first, then a voice, calm, controlled, and distinctly artificial through the encryption. Package confirmed at your 6 o'clock position, his handler's voice whispered. You are clear to proceed. Cipher's jaw tightened. His handler was Catherine Voss, a woman he'd worked with for 8 years. 8 years of brushes with death, 8 years of trust that had never wavered. But that was before everything started to feel like a trap. He glanced in a shop window's reflection. The street behind him was empty, too empty. No late-night wanderers, no drunk students stumbling home from clubs. In Prague, especially at this hour, silence meant surveillance, and surveillance meant compromise. Copy that, Cipher replied, his voice steady despite the tension constricting his chest. Initiating approach. The fountain loomed ahead, wreathed in mist. Water cascaded from the statue of John of Nepomuk, each droplet catching the amber light of the street lamps. Across the square, a man in a dark overcoat stood smoking a cigarette. The contact. His name was Victor, or so they'd told him. But who were they? Cipher had been asking himself that question with increasing frequency over the past week. The orders had changed, the protocols had shifted. The safe houses that were supposed to be secure had started feeling like death traps. 3 operatives in his network had gone dark in the span of 72 hours. 3. That wasn't coincidence. That was systematization. If you were in his position, who would you trust? He crossed the square with measured steps, not too fast, not too slow, just another tourist, though tourists didn't usually carry encrypted communication devices and weapons-grade pharmacology in their jacket pockets. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to abort. Every professional instinct cultivated over 15 years of black ops told him to run. But the mission came first. The mission always came first. That's what they drilled into him at the academy. That's what Handler Voss had reinforced 1,000 times. The individual is expendable. The objective is eternal. Victor stubbed out his cigarette and glanced up, making eye contact for exactly 2.3 seconds. The protocol. He turned and walked away, his pace deliberate. Cipher followed at a distance of 30 meters, counting his heartbeats to regulate his breathing. That's when the second message came through his earpiece. Not from Voss. A different frequency, a voice he didn't recognize. Agent Cipher, do not proceed with the dead drop. Repeat, do not proceed. You are compromised. Cipher's entire body went rigid. Compromised. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade suspended above his neck. Identify yourself, he hissed into his radio, his hand instinctively moving toward the pistol beneath his coat. But there was no response, only static, angry, demanding static. Victor was still moving ahead, completely unaware that the operation had just detonated into chaos. Cipher had seconds to make a decision. Trust his original orders, trust Handler Voss, and complete the dead drop, or trust the voice on the radio and disappear into the Prague night, becoming a fugitive from the very organization he had dedicated his life to serve. In that moment, suspended between 2 impossible choices, Cipher understood something fundamental about the human condition. Every decision we make is based on incomplete information. Every choice we commit to is essentially a leap of faith. Every action we take is gambling with forces we don't fully understand. He turned away from Victor and melted into the side streets, moving with purpose, but not panic. His mind was fragmenting, processing information at 1,000 miles per hour. Compromised. By whom? By what agency? How far did the compromise extend? Was Handler Voss involved, or had she been compromised? His hands trembled, but his face remained ice cold. The safe house on Nerudova Street was supposed to be off-book, a level 3 secure location that should exist only in encrypted files and the minds of the senior operatives. But if he was compromised, how safe was any safe house? Every shadow in his peripheral vision became a threat. Every figure passing on the street could be surveillance. Every car that stayed on the road for more than 3 turns was tracking him. By the time he reached the safe house door, Cipher's heart was hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. He inserted the key, disabled the alarm with the secondary code, and slipped inside. The apartment was dark, modest, utterly forgettable. Exactly what a safe house should be. He immediately checked the perimeter. Windows sealed, doors locked, emergency exit through the bathroom window, 20-meter drop to the alley below, but survivable. He pulled out a secondary phone, a burn device that never connected to the main network, and tried to access the secure server. Nothing. The encryption wouldn't break. It was like the entire network had become a locked vault with him on the outside. That's when his primary earpiece crackled again. Voss's voice returned, but different now, no longer calm, strained. "Cipher, where are you? Respond immediately." "I'm Dark. I received a compromise warning from an unidentified source." Silence. 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. "That was me," Voss said. Her voice carried something Cipher had never heard from her in 8 years. Fear. "But Cipher, you need to listen very carefully. Whatever happens next, you cannot trust anyone in the agency. Do you understand me? Not the director, not the deputy directors, not even me after the next 72 hours. Cipher's blood ran cold. "Catherine, what the hell is happening?" "Operation Blackstone," she said. "It's been compromised from the top. The entire network has been infiltrated by a hostile service. I don't know which one yet. Could be Russian, could be Chinese, could be something worse. They've been feeding us false intelligence for the past 6 months. We've been executing operations based on compromised data. 3 of our assets turned up dead because someone on the inside decided to cut loose ends." Every footstep echoed in his mind like a countdown to execution. "Why are you telling me this?" Cipher asked. "Because you're one of the few operatives I've had direct contact with for the past 72 hours. That means you might be clean. That means you might be the only one who can fix this." Voss paused. "There's a file. Location, coordinates 50.0826 degrees N, 14.4068 degrees E. That's the old archive building in Prague 1. The file contains the names of every compromised agent, every false intelligence operation, every betrayal. It's encrypted with a key that only 2 people know."
"You and someone else," Cipher whispered. "You and someone else," Voss confirmed. "The file is your insurance policy, Cipher. If you don't retrieve it, everyone in the network will die, starting with you." The line went dead. Cipher was alone again, holding a phone that suddenly felt like a loaded gun. He moved to the window and peered down at the street below. Prague was beautiful at night, all cobblestone streets and ancient architecture. But beauty was a mask. Underneath that mask was danger, and now he knew danger was wearing a federal badge. He had maybe 12 hours before the network realized he'd gone dark, maybe less. The hunters would be mobilized, every safe house would be compromised, every contact would be eliminated, and he, Agent Cipher, would be marked for termination. But the file, if he could retrieve that file, he might have leverage. Leverage was the only currency that mattered in this business. The rain intensified as Cipher made his way through the winding streets of Prague's Old Town. His hands trembled, but his face remained ice cold. The weight of the revolver under his coat felt heavier than it had this morning. Everything felt heavier now. The archive building was a 6-story structure from the 1920s, hidden behind a facade that had been deliberately aged and neglected. To most observers, it was just another piece of Prague's crumbling infrastructure. To Cipher, it was the most dangerous place on Earth. He approached from the northwest, using the shadows of the adjacent buildings as cover. His eyes scanned every window, every fire escape, every potential vantage point. The building appeared dark, dormant, untouched, but appearances were what his entire life had been built on deceiving. Every surveillance operative he'd ever known had one weakness: predictability. They expected targets to move in certain patterns. They expected protocols to be followed. They expected fear to make people desperate and sloppy. But Cipher had spent 15 years learning how to be unpredictable. He picked the service entrance lock, a 30-year-old mechanism that took him 8 seconds, and slipped inside. The smell hit him immediately. Dust, old paper, the acrid scent of long-abandoned institutional spaces. This was a tomb that contained the secrets that could either save him or condemn him. The basement archive was in sub-level 2. He navigated the darkness using muscle memory and the faint red glow of his night vision monocle. Down concrete stairs that seemed to descend into hell itself. The air grew colder with each level until he could see his breath crystallizing in front of his face. The archive room was sealed behind a reinforced door. Another lock, another 8 seconds. Then he was inside, surrounded by filing cabinets that stretched toward the ceiling like the bars of a cage. His hands trembled, and this time his face couldn't remain ice cold. The encryption key Voss had mentioned was hidden in a volume on the 3rd shelf, a fake book, its spine reading Kafka's Prague Journals. How many operatives had walked past this location without realizing they were stepping over the trigger mechanism for the entire network's exposure? How many handlers had issued orders that unknowingly contributed to their own downfall? Cipher opened the book. Inside, sealed in plastic, was a piece of paper with a 256-character alphanumeric sequence, the key. He pulled out a portable decryption device, military grade, no digital signature, completely untraceable. He input the sequence and waited. Seconds ticked like a heartbeat. Then, the files appeared. What he saw made his blood freeze. The compromised operatives weren't just the 3 who had gone dark. There were 47 names on the list. 47. And at the top of the list, highlighted in red, was a single entry. Handler Catherine Voss, double agent, suspected Russian FSB asset since 2019. Cipher stared at the words until they seemed to swim in front of his eyes. Catherine Voss. 8 years. 8 years of trust. 8 years of her voice in his ear, guiding him through impossible missions, pulling him back from the edge of destruction. 8 years, and she'd been working for the Russians the entire time. But that wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible, because if Voss was compromised, then what did that mean about the compromise warning? Was it a trap? Had she known I would abort the dead drop and move to the safe house? Had she known I would retrieve this file? Was this entire operation a setup from the beginning? His hands moved across the device, downloading the files to an encrypted flash drive. He had maybe 3 minutes before the system reported his access to the central network. 3 minutes to get out of the archive. 3 minutes to disappear before the hunters arrived. He heard it then, the sound of vehicles pulling up to the building's exterior. Not one vehicle, multiple, and the sound of doors opening, boots hitting the pavement. They'd found him. Cipher moved with the efficiency of a man who had nothing left to lose. The secondary exit from the archive led to a tunnel that connected to the basement level of an adjacent building. It was a route that only a handful of operatives knew existed. That gave him maybe 5 minutes of head start. He took the stairs 3 at the time, the flash drive clutched in his fist. His breathing had become shallow, almost hyperventilated. The adrenaline in his system was overwhelming, making everything seem both hyper-real and distant at the same time. Behind him, he heard the unmistakable sound of a battering ram against the service entrance. The hunters were inside. The clock was running out. The tunnel was pitch black, carved from stone that predated the Prague uprising of 1945. He used his night vision monocle to navigate, moving at a run that was more blind faith than actual navigation. The walls seemed to close in around him, the darkness pressing against his shoulders like physical weight. What had Voss said? You cannot trust anyone in the agency, not the director, not the deputy directors, not even me after the next 72 hours. What did that mean? Had she already known she was compromised? Had she been playing him the entire time, using him as a pawn in some larger geopolitical game that he was too low on the food chain to understand? His left shoulder suddenly erupted in pain. He'd been shot. The realization didn't compute at first. His brain refused to process the fact that he'd taken a bullet. The shot had come from one of the hunters who'd entered the tunnel behind him. The archive complex was larger than he had anticipated. They'd accessed it from multiple entry points. Cipher didn't stop running. Pain was a luxury for people who had time to acknowledge it. He kept moving, his left arm useless now, blood soaking through his jacket. The wound was high in the shoulder, not immediately life-threatening, but it was bleeding profusely. At this rate, he'd lose consciousness from blood loss within 30 minutes.
30 minutes to find shelter, apply tourniquets, and figure out his next move. The tunnel ended at a reinforced door. He didn't have the key, didn't have the code. He had the revolver. He emptied 4 rounds into the lock mechanism and kicked the door open. Another set of stairs, more darkness, more pursuit. By the time he emerged into the basement of the adjacent building, Cipher had lost all sense of time and direction. The city outside was a blur of rain and streetlights. His left arm dangled uselessly at his side. His breathing came in ragged gasps. He stumbled into an emergency clinic he'd noticed weeks ago during a reconnaissance pass. The doctor who worked there, a man named Kovar, was one of the few civilians who knew what Cipher really was, not by choice, by necessity. "You've been shot," Kovar said, no emotion in his voice. He'd seen this before, many times before. "No," Cipher replied, even as blood dripped from his fingertips onto the clinic's tile floor. "I was shot, past tense. Now I need medical attention and 20 minutes of absolute solitude." Kovar got to work. His hands were steady, professional. He cleaned the wound, applied antibiotics, and wrapped everything in a compression bandage. "The bullet's still in there," he said. "You need a surgeon, not me." "I don't have time for surgeons," Cipher said. "I have hunters, not doctors." The clinic's television was playing the evening news in Czech. Cipher's attention caught on a breaking story. 3 bodies discovered in Prague's Old Town, all executed. Intelligence agencies suspected. Those would be his backup team, Voss's way of tying up loose ends. Cipher left the clinic at 0447, his shoulders screaming with pain and his mind fracturing into increasingly unstable fragments. The flash drive in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He'd spent 15 years learning how to survive in the world of espionage, 15 years of becoming invisible, of erasing his identity, of learning to trust no one and nothing except the mission objectives. But the missions had been built on lies. The objectives had been compromised. Everything he'd built his life around had crumbled into ash. Who could he trust now? Voss was a double agent. The director had allowed the compromise to persist for 6 months. The entire agency was contaminated, and somewhere out there, hunters who'd been trained by the same system that trained him were moving through Prague with one objective: find Agent Cipher and execute him. He made his way to the safe house on Narodova Street, knowing that it was probably already compromised, knowing that walking through that door could be a death sentence. But he needed information. He needed to understand the scope of the betrayal, and he needed to access the secondary communication network that would allow him to contact the only person in the intelligence community who might still be clean. Colonel Marcus Brennan, Deputy Director of Operations at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Brennan had been Cipher's original handler before Voss took over. Brennan had recommended Cipher for the most dangerous assignments, had always pushed him to the limit. But Brennan had also been the one who'd installed the secondary communication protocol, a back-channel system that existed outside the official agency infrastructure. If Brennan was still clean, he could help. If Brennan was compromised, Cipher's position was hopeless. He activated the secondary protocol at 0533, his bleeding shoulders secured with fresh bandages that Kovar had given him. The response came within 90 seconds. Brennan's voice, encrypted and secured through a satellite uplink. "Cipher, you're alive. That's unexpected." "Sir, the network is compromised. Operation Blackstone is a Russian operation. Handler Voss is FSB. There are 47 operatives on the compromised list." Brennan was silent for a moment. "I know," he said, finally. "We've known for approximately 72 hours. I'm the one who initiated the compromise warning when you were at the dead drop." Relief and suspicion crashed together in Cipher's chest. "Why didn't you brief me immediately?" "Because I needed to identify which operatives were still clean. If I'd briefed you directly, the entire network would have known. Voss has access to every communication channel except the one you just used. That secondary protocol exists for exactly this contingency." He paused. "The question now is what we do with you. You've retrieved the file?" "Yes, sir." "Good. That file is the only leverage we have against the Russian service. They don't know we have it. They don't know you survived the hunt. And right now, that means you're the most valuable asset in the intelligence community. Cipher's mind was spinning. What's my next move? Survive, sir. For the next 72 hours, you cannot be captured. You cannot be found. You must stay alive long enough for me to mobilize a countermeasure. After that, we'll conduct a purge. Everyone on that list gets arrested. Voss gets tried for treason, and you become a ghost, a deep cover asset that the Russians will never even know exists. The weight of it crashed down on Cipher like a physical force. 72 hours of running, 72 hours of knowing that every breath could be his last, 72 hours of being hunted by the very organization he'd sworn to serve. I understand, sir. Do you? Brennan's voice carried something that sounded like regret. Cipher, you need to understand something. After this is over, you'll never be able to go back. You'll never be able to return to normal life. Voss was right about one thing. The individual is expendable, but the objective, the real objective, not the compromised one, is eternal. Can you live with that? Cipher looked at his reflection in the darkened window of the safe house. The man staring back at him didn't look human anymore. He looked like something that had already died and was just going through the motions of breathing. I can live with anything, he heard himself say. I just have to survive. The next 72 hours were a descent into something that wasn't quite hell, but was definitely not the world of the living. Cipher moved through Prague like a ghost, never staying in one location more than 4 hours, never using the same route twice, never allowing himself to sleep more than 30 minutes at a time. The shoulder wound became infected, despite Kovar's antibiotics. His body temperature fluctuated between 98 and 103 degrees. He started seeing things in his peripheral vision, shadows that became people, movements that became threats. The paranoia became something physical, something that lived in his chest like a second heartbeat.
On the evening of the second day, he saw a woman in a cafe that bore a striking resemblance to Catherine Voss. He followed her for 3 blocks before he realized that Voss was probably back in the agency headquarters, preparing briefings for her Russian handlers, reporting on how effectively the hunt for Agent Cipher was progressing. The woman in the cafe was just a woman, but Cipher couldn't convince himself that she wasn't a threat. His hands trembled constantly now, not just when he was under immediate danger, but always, even when he was in supposedly secure locations, even when he was trying to rest. His body had become a collection of physical manifestations of psychological warfare. The flash drive remained in his pocket, 47 names. Each name represented an operative who'd been marked for death. Each name represented a life that had been compromised, either by Russian intelligence or by the agency's internal corruption. He couldn't stop thinking about what would happen to those operatives once their cover was blown. Some of them were in deep cover. Some of them were in hostile territory. Some of them were raising families under false identities. Once that information became known, their deaths would be inevitable. Cipher had been responsible for many deaths in his career, targets that the agency had marked for elimination, operatives who'd gone rogue and had to be neutralized. But this was different. This wasn't death in the service of some abstract geopolitical objective. This was betrayal on a systemic level. At hour 56, Cipher found himself in a basement apartment in the Prague 5 district, shaking uncontrollably. The fever from the infected shoulder wound had spiked to 104 degrees. He was hallucinating. Catherine Voss kept appearing in the corner of his vision, whispering things about how trust was a luxury that neither of them could afford. He pulled out the flash drive and stared at it. 47 names. But he couldn't remember any of them. His mind had started to fragment. Reality had become something unreliable. What if Brennan was compromised too? What if the entire thing was a setup? What if there was no such thing as a clean operative in the entire intelligence community? What if he was going to die in this basement and the flash drive would never reach anyone who could use it? At hour 71, Colonel Brennan made contact again. "We're moving in 72 hours, Brennan's voice crackled through the encrypted radio. "There's a safe house on the outskirts of Prague. Coordinates will follow. Once you reach it, you'll be transferred to a secure location outside the Czech Republic. From there, you'll be processed into a deep cover identity. you'll essentially cease to exist. Cipher was barely conscious. The fever had broken, but the infection had spread to his lymph nodes. His left arm was completely immobilized. He'd stopped bleeding externally, but the pain suggested significant internal bleeding. "Understood," he managed to whisper. "There's something else you need to know," Brennan continued. "Handler Voss contacted me 6 hours ago. She claimed that she was the one who warned you at the dead drop. She claimed that she's been working for us, not the Russians. She's offered immunity in exchange for information about the Russian asset in the agency." Cipher's mind tried to process this. It wasn't possible. The file clearly identified Voss as FSB. But what if the file was also compromised? What if there was a conspiracy within the conspiracy? "Do you believe her?" Cipher asked. "No," Brennan said. "But the fact that she's making that claim tells me something important. The Russians know we have the file. They're trying to protect their assets by sowing confusion, by getting you to doubt everything, even the evidence. They're trying to make the file useless as leverage." Cipher understood then. This was psychological warfare on the highest level, not just aimed at him, but the entire intelligence apparatus. The Russians had invested too much in their penetration of the agency to lose it easily. They were going to fight with every tool at their disposal, including the weapon of doubt itself. Can he ever trust another human being again? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "The coordinates for the safe house are being transmitted now," Brennan said. "You have 6 hours to reach it before the extraction team departs. After that, you'll be on your own." The transmission ended. Cipher was alone again, holding the radio in his trembling hand, staring at the coordinates that supposedly represented salvation. But what if Brennan was compromised? What if the safe house was actually a kill zone? What if every choice he made was being anticipated, every move predicted, every escape route leading directly into the arms of his hunters? Cipher moved toward the coordinates with the last reserves of his physical strength. Prague was beautiful in the dawn light, the Vltava River reflecting gold and rose hues from the sunrise. But beauty was irrelevant now. Beauty was a luxury for people who still believed that the world operated according to a moral framework. The safe house was a cottage on the outskirts of the city, isolated and seemingly abandoned. Cipher approached it with his weapon drawn, checking every angle, every window, every potential point of entry. The door was unlocked. That should have been a warning sign. Inside, there was a single room with a cot, a table, and a radio receiver. On the table was a folder marked with a single word: continuation. Cipher opened it with the last vestiges of hope that remained in his psyche. Inside were photographs, not intelligence documents, not classified files. Photographs of his family. His sister, Margaret, living in Boston under her married name. His niece and nephew playing in a suburban park, completely unaware that his uncle's existence meant their lives were now forfeit. A note was attached. "If you don't comply with our new instructions, they will be eliminated. Cooperate and they will be left alone. The choice is yours." It was unsigned, but Cipher knew exactly who it was from: the Russians. Voss had told the truth. Cipher's compromise warning at the dead drop hadn't come from Brennan at all. It had come from the Russians. They'd allowed him to retrieve the file. They'd allowed him to think he was acting as a free agent, making choices based on his own judgment. But the entire game had been orchestrated from the beginning. The illusion of freedom was perhaps the cruelest trap of all. Cipher sank into the cot, his shattered mind trying to process the reality of his situation. He'd been trying to save the agency. The Russians had been using him to destroy it. He'd been trying to protect 47 operatives. The Russians had been ensuring their names would be permanently compromised once the file was leaked. And now they had leverage. His family, his sister, his niece and nephew, all of them hostages to his compliance. But what if this was also a trap? What if the photographs were old? What if his family was already dead? Cipher could trust nothing. He could trust no one. The paranoia that had been building in his system over the past 72 hours suddenly crystallized into something absolute and irreversible. He looked at the radio receiver on the table. Brennan would be waiting for a confirmation that he'd reached the safe house.
But what if Brennan was part of the plan? What if Brennan knew all along that the Russians had leverage over him? What if the entire intelligence community, American, Russian, British, Israeli, Chinese, every organization that claimed to serve some higher purpose, was just a collection of lies stacked on lies, deception built on deception, with human beings like himself caught in the machinery? The question that had haunted him for the past 72 hours suddenly demanded an answer. Can he ever trust another human being again?